But basically, you just want to make sure that it has the page references, so then you can easily go back when you're writing your brief and say, okay, well, this is when witness A said this, that went towards the intent element. And you also want to go ahead and put in everything dealing with the objections that were made by the defense if the trial court overruled that objection. So you want to just go ahead and put it in there. And what I like to do too, and I know Jim and Steve, if y'all agree, is I go ahead and put my little mental notes in there too, like, you know, if I felt like the defense should have objected at this particular question and they didn't, and, you know, if some harmful hearsay statements came in, you know, what defense counsel did to try to cure that. So I go ahead and do that, and, you know, again, if there's any type of motion in limines or whatever, you want to include all of that in your digest. That way, and I'll go ahead and put in a list of potential issues that we'll have to afterwards go through and vet. This is something that I think Robert touched upon too at the morning session was, you know, he likes to keep a separate list of the possible issues. I go ahead and just put it all in my digest, that I'll have it in one central location. And I go ahead and put in the pertinent case law too, so that way when I'm going back and working on it, I can look at the case and go, okay, well, this case said this particular thing, and so if I can add it to my brief.
Let's see if Chris had anything. Chris, you want?
Yeah,
a general observation about error selection, and then I'm going to talk about digesting too. I think that there are two successful narratives that recur in criminal appeals. One is that the truth-seeking process was so badly impaired by an error that we can't count on the reliability of the outcome. And the other potentially successful narrative is the procedure that was followed here represents a threat to and tends to undermine our fundamental rights in such a way that, notwithstanding that the outcome is reliable, we can't allow this decision to stand. I think there may be some other appellate arguments that can succeed that don't fall into those categories, but at the moment I can't think of them. So, in brief, in error selection and error winnowing, the ability to articulate those considerations is critical. And winnowing, I think, is critical, particularly in death cases. There are some reasons for putting some things in that you don't have a lot of faith in, perhaps. But that comes at cost. What is said in civil cases and auto appeals is true in criminal cases as well. Good arguments are weakened by association with bad arguments. Strongest appellate briefs, I've heard an appellate judge say that, you know, a lawyer who will raise only one issue, as far as I'm concerned, is a king. One who will raise two is maybe a nobleman. Three, you're still a peasant, and four or more, you're a serf. I think that's critical. I think selectivity is critical. I think combining the issues into a clear narrative about the reliability of the truth-seeking process, about, you know, innocent people do get convicted. That's the major reason we do what we do. Is important.
Let's see, I just had a few things to add, chiefly to what Steve said about how you attack a transcript. Let me get one thing out of the way real quick. Every one of you who takes one of these cases is going to have a very anxious client. And one of the banes of appellate work is that a lot of it is off the horizon. Nobody sees. You couldn't do a TV program of somebody writing an appellate brief or doing appellate research, for example.
I've done a number of cases that became somewhat celebrated in the press, but always at the parts where I was not involved.
But anyway, you've got a very anxious client, and he obviously wants to help himself. He is tremendously ill-equipped ordinarily to help himself, because this is, you know, once you're once you're dealing in the appellate phase, you're really in kind of an academic area, and an esoteric area. But as Steve said, you shouldn't overlook that he is the one person who should have been there throughout the whole proceedings, and he may know something. The problem is, when you get the case, you're not going to be able to fit what he knows or what he can tell you in the context until you've gotten up to speed by reading what's available on the printed record. One of the things that I do frequently with some success is to contact the client and say, look, I'm not going to understand anything that you're going to tell me until I have gotten up to speed. I'm going to have to read all of this. But at some point, I will know everything that's in the record, everything that's in the transcript. And you don't need to tell me about that. What you need to tell me about, if you want to help yourself, is to tell me what I might need to know about this case that you think is important that I wouldn't pick up from the record and from the transcript. Well, he may actually have something. Even if he doesn't, he's going to be gainfully employed kind of helping himself, and that's going to take the pressure off of you. And you tell him, look, when I get your letter, I'll lay it aside. When I've read the transcript, then I'll know I'll be able to fit in the context of what you told me, and I might have some questions. I'm probably not going to have any questions, more for you, until I got to that point. Anyway, as I said, it's very beneficial because it gives him a feeling of participating in his own appeal and of helping himself, because believe me, he's spending 24 hours a day not doing anything productive. The other thing that I want to point out is sort of part of the preparatory work to attacking the record of the conviction is to look at the indictment, to read the indictment, to outline the indictment. It's a little bit surprising to me how seldom trial lawyers even do this. We'll probably get into this later, but there are a great number of issues that really come out of the indictment when you interface it with the trial particularly. Unless you've really taken a careful look at that, you wouldn't, this whole area of legal error would be obscure to you. The other thing is to take a look at the statute defining good offense, or the statute's relevant to any other issue that you know is in the case. But you know from the indictment, from the charges, that the statute defining the offense is going to be an important thing. And you need to read the record both with a mind to what the indictment has said, what it's identified as the elements and the issues, and what the statute has said. And a lot of times there can be interesting questions if you apply some thought to that about what these things mean, what proof is amenable, can come in under any of it. The other thing is that you may have a case with a mixed verdict, a multi-count case with several acquittals or failure of the jury to convict. It's useful to know that from the outset, because, for example, if you've got a case involving kidnapping, robbery, and auto theft or something like that, and the jury acquitted of kidnapping, then this really affects how you read and how you digest that record. It tells you, in effect, that a lot of the material that relates to kidnapping is going to be useful to know, but it's probably not going to be as important to know as the stuff that relates to the robbery or whatever it was on which he was convicted. Now, another thing that we would like to have, anybody would like to have when you begin to read something, a transcript in particular, is you'd love to have an idea of where the case is going to go. Well, jury summations are not always reported. They're taken down, but they're not always reported. They often are. And frankly, that's a pretty good source for a preview of the case. If you want to skip ahead and read, as one of the first things you do, the summations, they're going to tell you how that evidence is unfolded from the perspective of both the defense and the prosecution. And that's going to enable you from the first witness to understand the context, what that witness is contributing to the whole case. You get, and you'll, by the time you've read the transcript, you'll know that. But it's an advantage to know that in advance because it affects, again, how you outline that case, how, what you note of his testimony, of that testimony. As I say, you want to, in mixed verdict cases, you want to read the record from the outset with a mind toward what the jury ultimately did. Cindy touched on the level of detail problem. And there, all I can say is that in the past, every now and then, I've had these short record cases. You know, the transcript is 50 pages. And I thought, oh, I don't need to digest this, just 50 pages. I have never had a record, however brief it is, where I have not regretted it if I didn't do that digest. You know, and the price I pay every time is that I go back and I spend as much time leafing through those 50 pages, or however brief that transcript is, trying to find what I need to know, than I ever saved, by avoiding doing a digest. A lot of times you might just simply want to know interesting stuff down there, particularly if you can capture in a couple of words, what it is. I had a lengthy case one time that involved a warrantless search and seizure, which essentially was it was one of these cases where, out in the country, where the local humane society contacted the sheriff, and nobody knew who had authority to do what, and they ended up sort of descending on this little 6-acre farm without a warrant, and that sort of thing. And that was the issue of the case. It was an animal cruelty case, and essentially the farmer couldn't afford to buy feed and stuff like that. But in any event, when I later on was writing the brief, I remembered an incident that had occurred during this, and I hadn't noted it at the time. And it was essentially where one of the farmer's sons had asked somebody for a warrant, and the person he had asked, I think, was a member of the local humane society, and they had given him a card instead. And so I was thinking of that old Clint Eastwood thing with warrant. We don't need no stinking warrant, that kind of. And I wanted to work something like that into the brief in a humorous vein, and and it took me forever to find it. I mean, it was one of those throwaway things that I didn't need. And of course, when I read it at the time, I didn't think I needed it, but I sure later regretted that I hadn't spent 2 words saying, no stinking warrant, or something like that, so that I've been able to find an insight to it.
I was just going to say, another use for the digest is for the case discussion. So when you're talking about the case with somebody else, they have something in front of them where they could kind of look over and have a pretty good idea of what your case is about. So they could help you, vet out the issues.
Cindy has touched on something that I actually didn't jot down in my notes that I think we probably all would recommend, and that is the usefulness of having a sounding board of that case. And what we do in our office in the appellate division is that when we got a case, we have, a lot of times we're having students or interns read the record. We have them prepare the digest, and we circulate that in advance if we can, and then we just meet on it with whoever's available, however many people are available, and sit around the table, and we attempt then to apply several minds to what is, to the story of that case as the digest reveals it, as the student reveals it. And what we tell them is that, excuse me, we try to relieve them of the burden of selecting issues. We want to know what they think the issues are, but we, law students in particular are rather intimidated by the whole process, and we try to assure them that, that what they do best, where they save us time, is to read that transcript and put together the story of that case, and then we will bat it around and we will try to tease the issues, potential issues out of it. And that's very useful, and it's, of course, particularly useful if you don't have a foundation in criminal law to keep around with people who do. And by the way, we're available for that. We'd be tickled to do that. In fact, it takes a case and wants to do it.
I want to talk just a little more about digesting, if I would. One practical suggestion I make is